go through what we're going to cover today, and once again, if you have questions, yes.
Do we get to talk about these now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, okay.
I didn't ask you to do it for nothing, believe me. Okay, so we did the attendance and what you selected for homework. We're going to go through, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start with the details on the spines because it's a small amount of real estate. It's easy to talk about and it will give you some of the precepts of what the standards in book publishing are. And I'm hoping that will be helpful for everything that you do. Then we're going to get into covers and the interior of the books. And talk about what kind of books take what kind of design. We're going to have a somewhat abbreviated discussion about editing because I could literally do a whole week on editing. And then I have some suggestions of maybe the next steps in your own process. And then we're going to leave time for questions. Pat, make sure that you flag me down at about 11:15 and say, okay, time for questions.
11:15. Okay. What time are we doing snack? When you decide.
All righty, we're good. I emphasized this the first time we were here, and I'm going to emphasize it again. Publishing is a manufacturing process. Writers are creating the raw material. It's almost as if you take, I've been watching Time Team on YouTube with my husband, and they talk a lot about smelting and how they get ore out of certain kinds of rocks. So basically what you have created with a book is the ore. Publishing is the refining process. Publishing is all about taking that raw material and making it as perfect as they can make it for readers. And there are lots of reasons why they do that. Am I in your way?
Oh, no.
Okay, fine. We all judge books by their cover. Absolutely everybody does. We judge each other by our covers, if you will. And we're going to talk about that kind of real estate. We're going to actually take a look at the structure of books from the outside in. Spines. What you all have in front of you. These are some of the ones I just picked off my shelf really quickly. Can you tell me, if you take a look at yours and combine it with mine, what do the ones that draw attention have in common? What do the ones that don't draw attention have in common? And it has nothing to do with the quality of the book, just what you see on the spine. If you shop in a bookstore, this is what you're going to see. If you're in a library and you're looking for a book, this is what you're going to see. Most books are spine out. So what do they have in common?
Well, you have contrast where something just sort of jumps out at you, and the others sort of fade in.
Yeah.
I can actually read what it says on that's a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Font
And
size.
the colors on the right, I can't really see the words.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want it to be so readable that if it's on the bottom shelf or the top shelf and I have my bifocals on, I can still read.
You'd be amazed how many people don't understand. One of the things I want to prove to you by the end of today is that you know a heck of a lot more about how this works than you think you do. And that's because printers and publishers have been training us as readers for centuries, literally, about how things work and how they don't. So, let's do the two, and that was the first thing, is high contrast. You can see this from anywhere, land girls. You can see this, you can see this, you can see this. This one's a little harder, but that's actually my photograph. It's not the book. If you saw the book, this is more orange and it actually jumps out a lot more. Very careful selection of fonts. Let me see if I can do this light here. This one right here, The Leveling Sea by Philip Marston, one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. I love that font. I'm a font queen. I love that font, but it is harder to read and it's thinner. And the letters, which actually sort of mimic the movement of an ocean, are not necessarily the best choice, especially against a darker background. This one right here, this is another great book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Hard to see. This one, Neil Gaiman, you see his name, and they're actually selling him more than they're selling the title of the book. But you don't see American Gods. Part of the problem, at least part of the problem, is take a look at the background here. The background is not one color. Now, I make covers. I've made many, 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 many covers. One of the hardest things to get typefaces to do is to stand out against a background that is mixed in color. And it can be the same color but different shades of it. And then this one down here, I mean, it's telling you that it's Scottish because it's got plaid and everything like that. You see the author's name, and that's probably more what they're selling than the title of the book. If you like Alexander McCall Smith, you're going to read everything by Alexander McCall Smith. But it's not as readable as it could be. So, this one here, I would have sacrificed that beautiful, beautiful font, and I love that font. I would have sacrificed that and in order to make it more like this one over here, Land Girls. Very careful selection of fonts. You need to be careful of that, or we're going to get into fonts. So what makes a good cover? Let's go to the front of the book. Again, high contrast. Look at what they did. They took the photograph and they put it in only part of the cover. The author's, she's not as well known as maybe J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or anybody like that, so her name is slightly smaller. They put period detail here in the photograph. If you ever have watched anything that has to do with World War II, particularly in Great Britain, those type of kerchiefs are prevalent. And there's a little tiny subtitle down here. So high contrast, period detail. They don't overwhelm you with the period detail, but it is there, and your eye is picking it up. Again, this one, The Leveling Sea, is about the founding and development of Falmouth in Cornwall in the UK. It is a far more fascinating book than you would think. The writer Philip Marsden is an absolutely wonderful travel writer. He's quite well known. The illustration is absolutely beautiful. If you've been to Falmouth, you know that this is Pendennis Castle, which was built by Henry VIII, King Henry VIII. But you can't see the title as well as you can see other of the book. So you've got the feeling of what the book is going to be about. Falmouth was pirate headquarters, literally. You get this wonderful curving detail, which matches the curves up here in the letter, and in the title. As a piece of art, it's beautiful. As a cover, it doesn't work as well as it could. If I were going to do this, I would take out the title, I would take out that circle, I would put it in a much better font, readable font like this, and put it across the top. You only spend how many minutes looking at a cover? You know? But it is going to attract your attention. Over here, Alexander McCall Smith. They used an illustration, and I think this is an interesting illustration to talk about. You get a feeling that this is kind of a funky book, you know, that is kind of low key. This is not going to be a thriller. This is not Stephen King. It's not horror. It's not anything like that. It's kind of nice, gentle. One of the things that I liked so much is what they did with the windows, very subtly. It's not until you actually look at the windows carefully that you realize that people are having conversations in there. If you look at it quick, it looks like maybe curtains. You know, it's just a little bit of difference in the color. And again, it's high contrast. So one of the other things I want you to note is what else they put on the cover. This is prime real estate. It is considered the primest, whether a book is an ebook or a book on paper. This is the first thing everybody's going to look at and make their first judgments on. So now they've told you this is now a major motion picture. They also put Gramercy. If you follow the movie industry at all, you would know that was a high-end studio. They're telling you that it's a spirited novel of love and friendship because they picked a photograph that's all women. You know this is a book that is emphasizing women. You know this one is a book about the sea. and you know this one is funky. This one has got a blurb right here on the top. A blurb is a little outtake from a review. I've never read a negative blurb, so they're all positive. Quick story. Catherine, oh my gosh, what's her name? She lives in Vermont, in Barrie.
Patterson.
Thank you. I knew you would know that, my library in front of it. Catherine Patterson tells this wonderful story, she's wildly popular amongst the YA crowd, about refusing to ever do blurbs. She never blurbs. And the reason for that is that one time a friend of hers came to her with a book that she had written, and she wanted Catherine to agree to blurb it. And Catherine reserved judgment, or reserved giving her assent until she had read the book. It was awful. And she knew that she couldn't in good conscience blurb a book. So, anyway, blurbs are something that publishers covet, especially if they came from somebody or some place that is really well known. And Alexander McCall Smith, what does that one say? Oh yes, his most famous series, this man is the most amazingly prolific author in the world, I swear to God. He probably creates half a book before he eats breakfast, is my guess. But his most famous series is the number one ladies detective agency, which takes place in Africa. It's really a delight. And the series is really a delight. So if you like that kind of writing, you're gonna like this. So they're tying you in with all of these things. Prime real estate. One of the things that we now have to think of as authors and would-be publishers is what happens when you put a book cover on Amazon, because it comes out to be about this big. So a cover can't be too busy if you want it to be seen. Each one of these is using white primarily. That makes them very, very visible. Everything that does get put on there is very, very visible. They get a little less easy to see as you reduce things down. I mean, this just looks like, when it gets small to me, just a little mass of gold. I have no idea what's in there. I can make it out a little better here, not much though. The title, which is here in this gentleman's scarf, Memento Mori, kind of disappears when you get down here. Would it have been better if they had put the title up here and let it show here? Perhaps. Malcolm Gladwell, very, very, very popular author. Every single one of the covers of his books uses the same theme. They're all white with a tiny little illustration on them, and then the title and his name. Every single one of them is exactly the same. One of the drawbacks to using a white cover is that when you put it on Amazon, they have kind of fixed that problem, because they now put, see where you can see the shadow underneath these? I did not put that there. It was put in there by Keynote, the program that I'm using. So Amazon does that now, because what would happen is that white books like this, they just disappeared. You had no idea where the edge of the book was, and all you could see were the names and the little illustrations. And Susan, this book is for you. The Fine Print of Self-Publishing. This is the 3rd edition. This one is mine. I think he's up to either the 5th or the 7th edition now. I really like this cover and what they did with it, because they put a little border around it, and it makes it pop out a little bit more. High contrast, visibility. And even when you make it smaller, you can still see the name, you can still clearly see the outline of the book. Something to consider. But notice how plain.
Michael Pollan book has a border too. It's
I'm sorry?
really, the Michael Pollan book has a border too.
Yeah.
It's really subtle,
Yeah,
but
a little tiny
it
border,
does,
yes.
Yeah.
it does make it stand out more
Yeah.
in the smaller photo.
So I'm gonna show you what that means in real life. These are my 4 novels. I made all of these covers. And this hopefully will be helpful. My first one is called The Road Unsalted, and sort of like Alexander McCall Smith, the town that I write about, Kearney, Vermont, is a little bit funky. I asked a friend of mine who's a quilter to make me a little quilt to put on the cover. thinking that would get the funky idea across. Except that, when I put this together, I realized I had just a small amount of space up here for the title. And my name had to be squished down here too. Not that my name is important, but the title definitely is. So I hemmed and hawed and hemmed and hawed and hemmed and hawed about what I was going to do about this for a while. The one part I really liked was this little doodad down here, the yellow VW bug. And if you can see really closely, it says, "I love Vermont, I heart Vermont" on the license plate. Well, I went into Photoshop and I took that out, because that's what I liked, and put it on another background. I think that shows up a heck of a lot better.
Yeah.
And I found I have done this with every single one of my novels, where the first cover, because it looks good on the screen, I can't emphasize this enough, every time you see your work in a different medium, you will see it in a very different way. I can't explain the phenomenon, I just know that it's there. So every time I get my first copies from the printer, my first reaction is, ugh, try again. One of the things I like about independent publishing is that I can try again. I can take it apart, I can put it back together again.
Now, the illustration you have on the second cover, like, who did it for you?
Oh, this was, the quilt was made by Nancy Graham.
Uh-huh.
I cut this out, and this is a piece of fabric in my quilt stash that I
Oh.
scanned and just popped it on top. Fabric is an amazing thing to use for backgrounds. I use it for backgrounds a lot, actually. The second
Do you
book.
have problems with copywriting? Because some fabric companies do copyright their patterns.
Not that they copyright their patterns, not necessarily, oh, I see what you're saying, the design, the fabric
Yeah.
design, that's a real old one. So, but that's a good point. Let's talk about copyright a little bit more, Susan maybe can add into that. I had the same problem with this one. Again, I asked my friend to make a small quilt. And this definitely illustrates part of what goes on in the story on the inside. But I thought it was too dark. After I got it back from the printer, it was too dark and too busy and didn't have enough clarity for me. So, I used one of my photographs. This is a photograph of a sunrise over Holland Pond in the Northeast Kingdom that I turned upside down because I wanted the yellow down at the bottom, so I could put the yellow up here. And I also changed the way that I do this because they all say novel of Carter.
Bigger print too on the title.
I'm sorry?
Is it bigger print on the title?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, this is the third one. I went to a painting. I have a friend who's a wonderful watercolor illustrator, and she's also a published author. And she created, this is just part of the painting that she created for the front cover, which I like a lot. But again, the type is too small. So, I just used a smaller portion of her painting and put everything in letters up on the top, bigger. This is a touchy-feely process. This is my latest novel, Lights and Water Dancing. This is the fourth in the series. I don't like this cover at all. When I made it, I sent it around. I have several friends who are designers. And I sent it around to them, and I also have a very small first readers community, and I sent it around to them and said, what do you think? Everybody, if you ask 50 people, you will get 50 opinions. If you ask 10, you will get 10 opinions. So after hemming and hawing and going back and forth, this is what I ended up doing. I'm changing this. I don't like it, but it probably won't do it till after the first of the year. But the book is selling well, so I'm not complaining. It's just that I don't think the cover does as well as it could. But I did get the spine right, I think.
Yeah.
So, do any of you have a cover that, or a spine that you think would be a really good example of what to avoid or what to do?
This is in the void. It's dark.
It's too dark and it's too
Yeah.
small.
Yeah. And this bounces out.
But I even find that hard to read.
You
I
do?
do
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. If no, the contrast isn't strong from
Oh.
distance.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, both on the same subject. One I can't even read, the lower one, the other one says gold at 40 Mile Creek stands out, and you say, oh boy, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, actually, I'd read that book. Now, take a look at the size of the font on the book on the top, Put, on the spine, if you turn it out to the spine. I think one of the issues there could possibly be, my eyesight, but it could also possibly be that they did it all in cap letters, and sometimes it's easier to read if you do it in cap letters and lowercase. That at some point, if you think about it, just kind of experiment with that. But I think that's a really nice spine.
See if you can read that.
I can't see that at all. It's brown. Other than that,
But that other one I think has small caps. It has small caps on the
Yeah.
other one.
yeah, and small caps are difficult to read for, in any sort of quantity.
I have one that, this is one of my favorite books in the world of this writer is mine. I can't see, you can't really see, you can see her name, but, and this, it's not, doesn't reflect what's in the title. really.
Yeah. See, I can't even really see the title from here. I can see her name, but I can't really see the
You
title.
can't see it at all.
Yeah.
And this is one I think really works,
Yep.
and so does the spine.
Yep.
It's called Walking on Eggshells, Navigating the Delicate Relationship Between Adult Children and Parents. I'm a therapist.
Here's a spine that I think works very
Right.
well.
Yeah.
Can you all see that it's a little rounded without the book? And the James McPherson, whoops, I should have brought the whole book. But you can, I think, James McPherson is such a well-known historian that it's his name that I think at this
That
point
they're selling.
sells the book as much as what aspect of the Civil War it's about. And so his name is pretty prominent, but the title, you can't see very well.
Yeah.
What's the cover?
Cover, here it is. The Shashinka cover,
All the
I think
covers
is
are very
really
good.
striking.
Yeah.
And the James McPherson, again, his name you can see from wherever. And you can also see the title. And the picture, if you have to look fairly closely to see the photograph of the Civil War soldiers. Yeah.
But that's sort of like the first glance would be James McPherson.
Right.
The second glance would be the title, and it's no more than a glance. And then if you're interested in the book, you may study the photograph.
Right.
See, I think that really works. Yeah.
But it looks like they spent a lot of time on the cover, that they really worked really hard to get the cover right, and then didn't worry about the spine. The spine
Yep.
was just less.
Which happens more times than you could possibly think. Spines get ignored, which is the reason why I start with them. Trying to make you aware of all the different parts of the book. Anybody else has a book?
I have a lot of books on, the book I'm reading is on Americans interned in the Philippines during the Second World War, so I have a lot of books on World War II on my shelf, and this one just bounced out at me. It's called Rescue at Los Baños by Bruce Henderson, and both for the contrast in terms of the color and the all caps, I thought it really did the trick, and it's a very dynamic book.
Is it a good book?
It's an excellent book. It's an excellent book, yeah.
See how much you all know?
Is that related to Henderson Field? Or?
No, he's Bruce Henderson.
This is a bad example. It's orange on gray. You'd think that would stand out, and it's large letters and capitals and everything, but I can't read it.
I can't read it either.
Yeah.
It's old, of course.
Yeah.
So, they've improved things since then.
Isn't that remarkable? I mean, that
Yeah.
really is, that's high
It should.
contrast, but
Show, and it
Yeah.
doesn't,
It's red China.
it's almost as if the letters
It's
are
red China. There you go.
I guess.
amazing.
One question. You didn't specify the thickness, what the width of the book should be, but the photographs on the spine, I found to have Teddy Roosevelt staring out at me would attract my attention.
Yeah,
So it
Yeah.
is,
yeah.
several of the books had the photographs on the spine. which I
And look at
found
the
effective.
clarity of the photographs. I mean, you can see the outside, the outline of both faces on the top
Yeah,
and
you
the
know who
bottom.
it
That
is.
was nicely done.
Yeah.
This is similar, and it was the author, their name, and the picture that attracted me,
Yeah.
so it's similar.
Yeah.
You,
The front is good too.
wonderful.
So-
One of the, after the
Okay,
book said,
yeah.
this is the one that didn't work because it's, again, it's italic font and not very bright, and it's done by Author House. So it matches
the
two of the
culprit.
things you had mentioned. It's, the color's poor and the font's poor.
And similarly this,
Yeah.
you can't really read these, even though these are my favorite colors, I can't really read that. So-
Yeah.
I've been thinking about images of faces on a cover and when that really works and when it really doesn't. Because I have a friend who's writing and her writing is set in Puritan times in New England. And her cover is, you know, a picture of a woman in Puritan dress, just her face. And when I looked at it, I thought, that really doesn't appeal to me. It
Yeah.
looks like a romance novel.
Yeah.
And yet this Shoshenka, that really attracted me, the
quite
picture of the
a-
Can you
face.
hold that one up again, Ms. Sashenka?
It's striking, can you
Yeah.
all see?
I mean, that's a stylized face.
Yeah.
It has a
Right.
Frida Kahlo look about it,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
with the
Right.
heavy dark eyes. And also they divided the face
It's-
almost in
right.
half
Right,
with
the-
that lace.
Yeah. the
Which makes
mystery of the
it jump
curtain,
out at you
yeah.
again. So they've used it more as a feature than a face. Faces are difficult. That's a really good point. Faces are difficult. Most publishing houses will tell you that an author's face sells exactly this many books because some folks are gonna like that face and some folks are not gonna like that face. That's why most author photographs are on the inside flap or they don't exist at all. Faces are really tough. Alan's got a really good example on that spine. That's a really good example on that. But faces are difficult. Sometimes illustrations of faces work better. You know, I mean, for a Puritan one, maybe having, all you'd need is a very simple woman's face with some sort of a Puritan hat on it, you know, or something like that. It's a good
Yeah, but
point.
I wondered if she could have chosen a different image than a face.
Oh, she probably could.
Because it's a generic face, it's not about a famous Puritan
Yep.
woman. It is a historical novel and I think her characters are historical characters, but they're family members,
Yeah.
so they don't, I'm sure she doesn't have a photograph or anything like that to go from,
Yeah.
so it's a generic young woman's face looking wistfully off in the distance, yeah.
And the fact that you took from that face that it was a romance novel, which is not what, I'm assuming is not what
Not
the
at
book was
all.
about. You know, that it's a chancy thing. Let's move on. Just trying to keep track of the time here. So now we're gonna move from the outside to the inside. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna back up just 1 second. One of the reasons why I'm emphasizing this is that if you go out and buy services to be able to create your book, if you hire an editor, if you hire a text designer, if you hire a cover designer, I want you to know what the standards are so that you can judge the quality of that work. Because you're gonna, if you do this on your own, you're gonna have the final say. If you go through a traditional publisher, you probably aren't gonna have a final say, though oftentimes really good traditional publishers will consult with their authors to see what they think. But if you're not a designer, that can be a very difficult thing, which is the reason why most traditional publishers don't ask, because writers are not designers. I have a really good friend, some of you may know him from commentary on BPR, Bill Schubart. And Bill and I did this class, and plus he was speaking at the same time earlier in October. And I did Bill's first 3 books. I was the one who created his covers, I was the one who did the text inside, I hired the editor. I basically did the whole project for him. And he's a joy to work with, an absolute joy to work with. And when he was doing his talk, when we were together in October, he was telling the crowd, this is for the League of Vermont Writers, that he basically hired me and then just got out of my way because he knows he's not a designer. He'd rather spend the money and be able to say, okay, that kind of works, or I really need this, and it was a wonderful collaboration. So if you're gonna work with a designer, understand a little bit about what you want one of the best things you can do is just what you did with all of these spines. Pick out books whose design you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your subject area, but it helps a designer to understand what your aesthetic is and how you see things. You know, one of the worst things a designer can hear is, oh, just do anything. Direction. So now we're going to move to the inside. This is a little trickier than it looks. But I want to emphasize again, you all know a lot more than what you think you do. Can you read that?
It's
Yeah.
hard with your glasses on.
No, very hard.
Oh, it's all capitals.
And it's just running on, it's just,
Yeah.
Years ago, there was an exhibit in the Hood Museum of Art in the tiny little gallery that's way out in the back, and it was manuscripts that were in the special collection at the college. And I was fascinated by looking at them. They were 13th, 14th century primarily. And I don't read Latin, but even if it had been in English, I could not have read it because it looked like this. Every letter was exactly the same height. There were no descenders, there were no ascenders. There were no paragraph indents. There were no, as far as I could tell, no punctuation except for every once in a while there was a dot
yeah.
that was raised above the line. That was it. No apostrophes, no quotation marks. None of that stuff existed. People didn't use that. So we have come a long way from what books used to look like. Text design is critical for getting your readers into your books. Think about how if you're reading a book and you're really in an exciting part and you're trying to read as fast as you can because it's, 12:30 at night and you really have to get up early in the morning. I've done this so many times. And you come across a typo, something is misspelled. As a reader, you're almost visually stubbing your toe just a little bit. You kind of stumble. Well, in a 90,000 word novel, I can forgive a single typo. I can even forgive 2 typos. But when you get up into 10, 20, 30, that book's going in the trash. If you aren't doing things consistently, like the way that you're spelling somebody's name, and I've seen this happen too, that book's gonna go in the trash. There are so many things to read that readers only need one little excuse to not read your work. Don't give it to them. Hopefully by the end of this you will know. All of this stuff that we're going to talk about for the next probably half hour or so is stuff that the printers discovered as they started creating books, because they were paying attention to what was selling and what was not. And it wasn't all based on who the writers were. It was based on the way the books were created. The way that we physically read has everything to do with what we were talking about in the spine. Human beings like black type on white paper with letters that have very crisp edges so that we can see where things begin and where they end. Even on ebooks, if you'll notice that ebooks, that technology keeps trying to mimic what real books are already doing, probably better than any ebook ever will, in my opinion, but I'm prejudiced for paper. And always remember that the grammarians and the dictionary folks, they showed up after the printers had already established the rules. They just codified them and standardized them. They didn't make the rules. So, we're going to start real simple. There are 2 basic kinds of fonts. There are serif fonts and there are sans serif fonts. Serifs are these little doodads that come off the edge of letters, right here. You'll notice there is nothing. These are all pretty straightforward, all of these. Serifs help us read, because we don't read individual letters. Probably most of us don't even read individual words. We actually read word shapes more than anything. If you ever get the chance to really sort of delve into the science of reading, it's absolutely fascinating. Somewhere somewhere along the line, I think around the 15th century, a guy named Garamond, can't remember his first name, created the single most readable typeface in the universe. It is still in use today, and we're 500 years after the fact. Garamond is eminently readable. If you have that on your computer, and it doesn't come installed on Macs anymore, which makes me furious, I have to go out and buy it. It is the most eminently readable typeface. Sans serif is good for very short blocks of type. Headlines on newspapers. The little tiny type that maybe has the title of, let me see if any of these have that. Does anybody, if you look on the inside of your books, here you go, here's one. You'll notice up here at the top, it has, the Iron Exchange, Dark Star. I'm assuming that these are chapter titles or something like that, Dark Star?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pass this around so you can take a look at it. These are referred to in publishing as headers. Oftentimes, one of the headers will be consistently the writer's name. The other one will be consistently the book title. Sometimes they will reflect chapter changes as well. So those are headers. Notice what typeface they're in as this goes
Or is that
around.
the title?
No, this is, oh, Alan first, Dark Star, yes, this is
Yeah,
the,
the title.
okay, so this is the title, and I'm assuming that that's probably the chapter title in there. So, but notice the difference. Short bursts of type, sans serif. Large text blocks, serif. Always, always, always. Other examples of serif typeface would be Baskerville. Times is another one. Bodoni is another one. There are all kinds of beautiful, wonderful typefaces. But the ones that usually come in as defaults on every system, Times is almost always there. If you don't have anything else, that's a pretty good choice. And this is also if you're sending something out to a traditional publisher or an agent and you want them to read it, make sure you're doing it in serif typeface. Then you have other kinds of fonts. There are bazillions of fonts out there. This is considered, this is the font Curls, C-U-R-L-Z. I love this. This is great party imitation font. But specialty fonts are meant to convey a feeling as well as information. These guys down here are referred to as dingbats. Sometimes symbols, oftentimes dingbats. I have a little tale to tell you about specialty fonts. A friend of mine, her name was Dolores, she's passed away now. She was a writing teacher here in the Upper Valley for years. And she did this little talk like I'm doing right now about why you choose serif fonts or sans serif fonts, depending on what it is that you're working in. And so she had everybody writing short stories or chapters or something like that, and they brought them all in so that she could read them and make comments on them and do some editing on them. One of them was done completely in the Gothic font. I want you to imagine reading 20 pages of Gothic font. Dolores was a much nicer and more patient person than I am. I would have refused. But she did. She made it all the way through. And remember, this is after she had done the lecture about fonts and choosing fonts. And so when she gave the paper back to the writer, she said, "Why did you choose this font?" And she said, "Well, it's a Gothic novel." No. No. One of the things you want to look for, if you do look for a text designer, you want to make sure that they're consistent with everything that they do. That they don't fill a document full of all different kinds of fonts. Everything is consistent, everything is done exactly the same way. One of the things that you need to always remember is that you're trying to give a reader, it doesn't matter what kind of a book it is, you're trying to give a reader a transcendent experience. You don't want to put up things that are going to stop them from getting into your novel, using your cookbook, reading your dictionary, reading your literary nonfiction. You don't want to give the reader reasons to stop. You want to open that door and make sure that they're coming inside. So, fonts, you probably only need two. One sans serif and one serif. This, I don't know if any of you ever got into this recording back in 1971. I loved Harry Nilsson's The Point, and I loved the cartoon. It's a little fable about this little guy whose name is Oblio. And Oblio lives in the land of Point. Oblio right now is wearing a hat, but his head is round. He gets banished from the land of Point because he has a round head. It's a fable. And like all good fables, he goes off and he meets different characters and stuff. This is my favorite character in the minor ones. This is the pointed man. And after Oblio meets the pointed man, he comes to the conclusion that the pointed man had so many points that he had no point at all. Believe it or not, this applies to text design. I love this cartoon. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's so much fun. So, what makes pointed text? How many of you can tell me what's wrong or not done correctly in that block of text?
There's some capitals that
Very
shouldn't be
good.
capitals.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
local government,
Yep.
guardrails, plowing,
Yep.
salting.
Yep. Keep going, Susan, you're doing
Sand.
good.
Too many there.
The reason why we have capitalization rules is to avoid just this thing. Why is front, and I actually misspelled that, I apologize, it should be door, obviously. Why is front door capitalized? It's not the title of anything. Why is bridge capitalized?
Is this something that you did yourself for an example?
Yes.
And
Oh, yeah.
son-in-law.
This is from one of my short stories. It was on, you're gonna see this text block again and again and again. I'm sorry to bore you with it, but it was, I didn't want to have to rewrite anything.
I wondered if the writer had been European.
I'm sorry?
I wondered if the writer had been European, like especially German. They capitalize their nouns,
Yeah, I know.
so I wondered, and I
No,
used to
I'm
do
not
that.
German, that's mine.
Okay, well, that's why I asked if it was yours, if you
Yeah.
were just doing it for an example.
Yeah. But notice what happens if you, let's take this line right down here. Winter, of course, brings plowing and, what is that?
Salting.
and sanding. And every time you see a capital letter, your head goes, makes a little bit more emphasis. Plowing and salting and sanding. Too many points, so it becomes pointless. The only author I've ever known who has successfully used capital letters where they didn't belong is the author of Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
I love that book. I usually take that out in the first of spring and I read it again. I love that book. But the way he uses capital letters in that book is actually funny. You know? So if you're gonna do something like this, make sure you're doing it for a really good reason. Otherwise, learn your capitalization rules because they really do matter. Okay, what's wrong with this one?
I see a typo first.
Oh, yeah.
Wrapped,
Called.
wrapped is wrong, it should be W.
Oh, I'd fire the editor.
Good for you, because you should. You should. What I was saying about typos before, about how we stub our toe as a reader when we see them, this would infuriate me at the bottom of page 1 if I ever came
Oh, yeah.
across a document like this.
Yeah.
As an editor, and I've worked extensively as an editor, if a writer gave me that document, I would have sent it back unread. Except for maybe the first 4 paragraphs, that's all you need. There's a reason why we have those rules.
Yeah.
Remember what I said about William Caxton, about how he started making the language standardized so that we could understand each other? That's why this stuff is important. And it's not just because I'm a word nerd, though maybe. Okay, what's wrong with this one?
Oh, too many
The
italics.
italics.
And
Different
red,
Red.
yeah,
And bold.
Yeah.
yeah,
Every time you use,
and it's inconsistent.
this is one of my
and
pettest of
it's-
pet peeves. I had this wonderful client at one time, I just love this gentleman, nice guy, but he was obsessed with using lots of italic and lots of bold and lots of red letters. In a 48-page book that had maybe 2,500 words in it, I can't tell you how much of this stuff was in there. It became impossible to read.
Yeah, it really interferes with the reading.
Yes, yes, and that's my point, it interferes. Think of things like italics and bold as hot pepper. And you're putting it on your chili and you're making it really spicy. You don't use this stuff unless you have a really good reason to emphasize that. And most of the time, if you take it out, you won't notice that it's gone. Reading italics especially, reading italics in large blocks of type is actually quite difficult. It's sort of like reading Gothic type. After a while, your eyes start going like this. You're making the reader uncomfortable. Unless you're doing a how-to and you have a certain reason for wanting to use a different color type, and sometimes you do, sometimes, this is not all bad. I would never do this, never. And one of the things you need to know when it comes to printing, if you have even one color on one page of a book, the entire book will be printed on a color printer. And it costs 3 times as much per page to print a page in color as it does in black and white. If you can stay away from color, unless you have an extremely good reason to do that, I would definitely recommend that you do that. Okay, can you read the one on the left?
No.
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 How about the one on the right? Is that any better?
No.
That's a little too much.
Yeah, too much
Yeah.
space.
Yep. So we're talking about leading. That's the space between the bottom of this line and the top of this line. Leading. On a hand platen press, it's an actual slice of lead that gets put in between lines. You will notice if you're working in Word, if you're working in Pages, if you're working in anything that allows you to change leading, it can make a huge difference in what you're doing. This is also a really good example of why when you're working with publishers and they ask you how big your book is, you always answer with words. Word count matters because this is the same number of words. Exactly the same number of words. Look at how many I could fit on a page here as opposed to here. That's why. The only time page count matters is when you get down to making the cover because the spine has to be exactly the right size. Otherwise, it's all words. And if you're going toward, if you're trying to find an agent or you're going for a traditional publisher and they ask you how long your book is and you answer in pages, they know you're an amateur. It's a dead giveaway. So how do you get started? Most word processing programs default to a sans serif font. Oftentimes it's Helvetica. Gill Sans is another one that they may default to.
Arial sometimes.
Yeah. Change it. Change it so you can read it. You'll be more comfortable as someone who's working on it. Your eyes will be more comfortable looking at it this way. So always use serif fonts for your text. Be consistent. Use the same one. Don't change from Times New Roman to Garamond halfway through the book. Your readers won't know exactly what the font is, but they will know you did something different. Use proper spacing for paragraph indents and after punctuation. Here is the rule. We all learned, probably all of us learned how to type on typewriters initially. And what do you do when you get to a period on a typewriter? You hit the space bar twice, right?
It used to.
That's because typewriters are monotype machines. Every letter, whether it's a W or the letter I, take up exactly the same space because the wheel that's moving the carriage is spaced exactly the same. The typewriter doesn't know whether you're using the letter I or the letter W. When this, we owe this difference to Steve Jobs. When he, long before Apple, when he was a semi-quasi student in college, he never ever got a degree. He kind of looked around from one class to another, to another, to another, and just experimented with taking all different kinds of things. Fortunately for all text designers, one of the classes he took was calligraphy. And that's when he began to appreciate how every letter takes up its own amount of space. On a typewriter, the reason why you hit that space bar twice is because that's the only way you can see this, where a period is and where the next word starts. Computers don't do that. Computers they know it's a W, so they take the space the W needs. They know it's a small letter I, they take that same exact space. If you put 2 spaces after a period, when you're using a computer, that space pops out. It's just this little white that's all over the place. It is also one of the dead giveaways for an amateur writer. If you have this habit of using 2 spaces after a period, try to stop.
What is no widows or orphans mean?
I will get there.
Oh, okay.
So do you use no space or one space?
I'm sorry?
Do you use no space?
You always use one space.
One
Period,
space.
one space. Question mark, one space. Exclamation point, one space.
Okay.
It's always one space. Here's another one. Notice how the paragraphs are indented over here. Every one is indented 0.25 inches. That's about normal for an indent. Do not use your tab key. In fact, I want you to pledge to me that you will never touch the tab key on your computer keyboard ever again. I'm serious. Tab keys are deadly. And the reason for that is that when you take the raw text, you take something like this or like this, you take that raw text and you bring it into a design program like InDesign, those tabs make everything move in all different kinds of directions, and the text designer will have to go through and manually take out every single one of them. And when you're paying somebody $75 an hour, you don't want to pay them to do that. Do not use your tab key. Now, some of you will have Microsoft Word, some of you will have Pages. Find out, you can just do it online. How do I control the indent of paragraphs in Microsoft Word? And do that. You can do it manually where you can always make sure that your paragraphs are about 1/4 of an inch in. You're all pledged, right? You promised me, right? You're not touching the
So
tab key,
maybe
right?
I might be the only one who's not understanding this, but and I've been writing for a long time. What, are you saying there's actually something in a Word program that will automatically indent for you? Give me a hint. Where would I find it?
Under paragraph, I think.
Yeah,
Is it, I can't.
setting up on Pages,
Page
it's setting up
setup.
the format, and there's a place for indent
Yeah.
somewhere.
Or sometimes it says first line.
Yep. So if you look for
Okay.
first line, if you just Google it, it's probably easier to do it this way. If you just Google, how do I indent first lines in Word? It'll probably get you right to what you need to
It
do.
might be doing it automatically. I've never really focused on how it indents. That's interesting. Okay, all right.
One of the things I do know, unless I haven't used Word for a really long time, so I'm really deficient on my knowledge of Word. It used to be that Word's default was 1/2 inch, which is really too big. It really should be 1/4 of an inch, because just visually it looks better that way. It looks more professional if you do it that way. One of the things that will happen as your manuscript flows into the text design stage is I can take out all those paragraph indents with 2 keystrokes. I'm done. Doesn't cost anybody any money. The tabs are a totally different story. Tabs are also something that people use, for example, if they want to make a chart and you want to have, if something, I need to do this from this side, right? You have a column over here and you want things to be in a column over here, and you want, and people will often hit the tab key in order to be able to make that happen.
Mm.
They'll hit another thing is not to hit the return key in between paragraphs. If you want to do your typesetting so that instead of indents, you have a space between paragraphs, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do, do not hit the return key to make that happen. There is a way you can do it automatically with it. I can't emphasize this enough. Learn how to use your word processing program's formatting. It's a powerful, powerful tool. And it will make everything that you do look that much better. Most of the time, books are, let's talk about justification. This is all left justified. It's called left justified ragged right, because you'll notice that the right margin goes back and forth, back and forth. This is left justified because the main margin of all the paragraphs are the same. It is also right justified. Most books are done this way. Not always. There are exceptions to every rule, but most books are done this way.
Most books are done which way?
They're fully justified.
Fully justified.
Okay, widows and orphans. Here's Pat's question. Notice how odd that looks there. It is the last part of the word griddle. And it's just kind of hanging there, right? This is something else that interrupts a reader's flow. Remember, this is all about keeping the reader involved. A widow is a word, part of a word or a short single word that is left on a line by itself. This is bad typesetting. If you're looking for somebody to do text design and typesetting for you, ask to take a look at examples of their work. If you find widows, orphans are one of these that shows up on the next page. So if, let's say this was the last line on a page and it says, deftly flipping eggs on the grid, and you turn the page and it says, dull, bad form, bad form. Most of the time when a book is typeset, books usually go through two phases when they're typeset, and by that I mean the text design is applied to the raw manuscript. It's also called formatting, but formatting also has so many different meanings in publishing, I try not to use that word. Oftentimes this will show up the first time through, and your job as the writer is to go in and take something out of a paragraph so that those things disappear, or add words into a paragraph so that the line becomes longer. There's a lot of little adjustments that go on there.
But it can be kerned too.
I'm sorry?
You can use kerning sometimes to fix that.
Yes, yes, you can use kern. Very
Use
good, I'm
kerning.
impressed. Kerning, K-E-R-N-I-N-G, has to do with the spacing within a word.
It's something you can set and it
Oh.
changes
Yep.
it ever so slightly.
Yep, and basically what it would do, let's say that, I wanted to pull this up into this line. I would probably go and I would pick out a longer word, maybe flipping here, and the process is called kerning. Kerning has to do with the way that letters are squeezed together or spread apart. And you can change that, it's extremely subtle. But if I just change that word flipping just a tiny bit to squeeze those letters in just a little tiny bit, that DLA could pop up into the next
So
line.
you could do it for just one word
Mhm.
without affecting the rest of it, and
Mhm.
it wouldn't like stand out
Right.
as, oh.
Your text, your word processing programs are extremely, extremely powerful. They can do almost all of this stuff.
Would it make a difference if you chose the word morning instead of flipping? And I'm thinking that because the L's and the
Yes.
I's are really tiny.
Yeah.
And which would be the better word choice?
Yeah,
for
well,
kerning?
that morning would be better. Where is morning?
Look up on that same line towards the beginning of
Oh, yeah,
the
up here.
Yeah.
I probably would choose that instead of this one, because what's gonna happen notice the F and the L, how close they are to each one to each other?
Yeah.
If I did that, if I did kerning, that L would probably start running right into that F.
Yeah.
But experiment, just, take a random bunch of text, put it up on your screen, and just start playing. Figure out what these tools
You can
do.
also just rewrite the sentence.
You could rewrite the sentence, yes. Yes. I do that a lot, and I always find extra words. I have a tendency to use the word so, S-O, or just, or very. And so I actually go through, when I'm all done writing something, I actually go through and I do a find for all the so's and all the very's and all the justs, and I take out probably 90% of them because I don't need to be there.
Who's responsible for A, pointing it out, and B, fixing it? Would the layout person be responsible for making sure that doesn't happen? Or is the layout just, boom, formats it, and then it's your job is all
That's a really good question. That is a super good question. Within traditional publishing, the formatters, the people who are actually laying out the text, they are actually forbidden to change words within a text or change the kerning. They can circle things, they can draw attention to them, but it's up to the editor or it's up to the writer to do the fixes. So, however, depending on the text designer that you're working with, they may just go ahead and fix this. And it also depends on the relationship between the text designer and the author. When I was doing books for Bill Schubart, I had this discussion with Bill. And I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I'll just fix it. So that's what I did. And sometimes it was kerning, sometimes it was taking out an extra word. If it really needed a little bit more than I was comfortable, I would often just circle it and say, what do you think? And send it back to him. So it really kind of depends on the relationship, but strictly speaking, it should be the publisher's, AKA author's, purview to do that. It's your responsibility to do that. You know, you don't want a text designer going in there and changing your work. It's just not cool. And last but not least, and then we're going to take a little break. Every different kind of book has its own way of being designed, and this is all done to help the reader be able to get through it. Dictionaries over time changed a whole lot. This is pretty much the standard format that we all expect when we take a look at a dictionary or a thesaurus. We see the word that's going to be defined, how it gets pronounced, what kind of a word it is, the definition of the word, maybe where it came from, how it's used, and the origin of it. This is taken from my dictionary program on my computer. Even though it's electronic, they're still using the same formatting. This was developed somewhere around the time of Charles Dickens is when this really became the way that things are done. So pay attention to what kind of a book you're doing. This, of course, is a poem. Poems have their own sort of formatting. All you have to do is take a look at a page. I mean, if you put a page of a poem over there, we probably would all recognize that it's a poem right away because they sit on a page with a lot of white space around them. I actually cut this down so it would fit. Cookbook. Cookbooks have their own sort of formatting. How-to books have their own sort of formatting. Instructional manuals will have their own sort of formatting. Novels have their own sort of formatting. Figure out what kind of a book, where do you fit in those categories, is it that you're working on, and take a look at other books in that category to see how the type gets handled on the page. So if you go out and look for people to do this work for you, then you'll know what you're looking for. So, let's take a break. Advice. We were just talking about programs, software programs, and what you use for books. The principal program that is used for all books, as far as I know, is Adobe InDesign. It comes in a suite referred to as Creative Suite, which includes Photoshop, Acrobat, Illustrator, and I'm forgetting what Photoshop, yeah, I said Photoshop. It's a huge amount of programming, huge. I love InDesign, absolutely adore InDesign. You have such control over text and images and the way that things look. It is just amazing. So I've been using it for a long time, and I bought the last copy, I have Creative Suite 5 point something, and they're up to about 7, I think now. And the last time I purchased Creative Suite, you used to be able to buy the program and put it on your computer, and you were done. You can't do that anymore. Adobe has, like Microsoft has, and probably other places are headed in this direction. You now pay a monthly fee to rent the program. For Creative Suite, it is $50 a month. The downside of it, well, there's several downsides, but the big downside of it is that once you have created something in InDesign and you want to go in and change something or fix something or extend something, you still have to be paying the rent for Adobe InDesign. So at, $50 a month, there's $600 a year, multiply that by how many years, you get the idea. So I don't do that anymore. I have 2 computers. I have my Adobe on my old computer, where it's still sitting, still humming along, and it still works, except I can't get online with that computer anymore because it's so old. Because I don't use it that much anymore. But most designers that you're gonna function with, that you're gonna talk to, that is what they are using, is Adobe InDesign. Quark Express used to be the big one in this field, and then Adobe very aggressively hired away all of their software engineers and created InDesign. They used to have PageMaker, was one before that.
I think that was like the baby version of
Yeah.
InDesign.
Yeah. So there are several of them out there. This is the reason why I'm not recommending necessarily that you do your own typesetting, but I want you to be aware of what you're buying and what you're looking for. Also, speaking of fonts, Adobe is the font hog of the internet. And if you want to buy a font, for example, I'm going to be buying Garamond because it didn't come installed on my little laptop. Adobe is the best place to buy them. The fonts are clean, they will not corrupt your computer. There are places, and when I send you these slides, you'll see that on the serif, non-serif slide. There are places where you can get free fonts. And I've been doing this for years with a place called Da Font. Every so often I go and I need a special dingbat and I find it on there and I've downloaded it. I'm knocking on wood. I've never had any problems. But with the newer computers, they're getting fussier and fussier and fussier about fonts. Fonts are one of the most difficult things to handle on a computer, I understand from software engineers. So you really need to be careful if you're going to put a specialty font on your computer and you get it from one of these free sites. I would actually go out and probably do a little research to see if other people have had problems before you do that. Just a little word to the wise. So we're going to whistle through editing. I'm sorry we're whistling, but we are. There are essentially 3 types of editing. Developmental, copy editing, sometimes called text editing, sometimes called line editing. Line editing is the phrase that gets used more in newspapers. And proofreading. This is not done very much anymore. In fact, it's not done in traditional publishing at all. Developmental editing is best known through an editor called Maxwell Perkins, who used to work for Random House back in the 40s and 50s, maybe into the 60s. You may not know his name, but you know who he edited, because he was the editor for Ernest Hemingway, for F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Thomas, not Tom, Wolfe, Look Homeward Angel. He spent tons of time on books. He basically was the book coach. Thomas Wolfe at one point in time accused him of being the actual author of Homeward Angel because he changed so much in the book. Developmental editing is expensive because it takes a lot of time. A developmental edit would be if you've got, and this happens to every writer, you got this great big mishmash of something, it's a pile of words, you're not quite sure what you're going to do with it, and you need somebody to help you find your way out of the jungle. That would be a developmental editor. My recommendation is to push past that, understand that every writer, the first drafts are always rubbish. Always rubbish. That is the purpose of a first draft, is to get the rubbish out. So you probably won't need this. This is is the one, if you're gonna spend money on a book, and you have a limited budget, and almost all of us live on limited budgets, this is the place you want to spend your cash. Out of all the things that you can do, this one is the most important. A really good copy editor will do amazing things. Copy editing is not just checking for typos. That's when you get down here into proofreading. A copy editor will say, you know, they kind of press, I've done this work forever, you kind of press on somebody's sentences and say, does this make sense this way? Does it integrate with this one over here? And, you know, this plot line seems to get disjointed, and they're the kinds of folks who will find that. I have a wonderful editor that I work with. She lives in Norwich. And even when I was still doing a lot of work for traditional publishers, I was using her as an outside editor. This is my best story about Ruth. I was working on a book about making your own perfumes and colognes for Story Publishing, now Workman Press. And I was doing the inside and project managing and doing all the other stuff. I sent it to Ruth to copy edit. Ruth, being Ruth, took the time to figure out how many drops were in a teaspoon, because all of the perfume recipes were done by drops, and she figured out that they were all wrong. Copy editors are worth their weight in titanium. But this is a touchy-feely relationship, okay? Again, when I was with Bill Schubart at the beginning of October, Bill was talking about being edited. And his approach is the one I absolutely agree with. Don't go in with ego. It's only words. Don't take anything that an editor says personally. It's only words. You can fix them. The problem with being the writer of a piece is that you can't see what needs to be fixed. You just can't. When I hand my work to Ruthie, my instructions consist of a single sentence. Do not let me go out there and make a fool out of myself in public. Fix it. Just show me. I can take care of all the rest. If you feel really sensitive about your work and you're really nervous about editing, please pay attention to that feeling, because you may not be quite ready. As I said, this is a touchy-feely relationship. Not every editor is good. Some editors are really not good, but most of them are at least medium-high to high-range people. You will get back. Most folks do it through computer programs now, and you can actually use editing tools in Microsoft Word and in Pages. So you will get back this thing that's got red marks all over it and comments and all kinds of things. Really pay close attention to those. You'll be amazed at how it can improve a book. Yes?
So at what stage would you do copy editing? When you think you're done?
Yes, when you think you're done.
Okay.
Okay. And there are a couple of things that I would do before you do that. First of all, if you're fresh off your book, if you just finished it like last week, put it in a drawer, walk away, go do something else, even start another book, and come back about 3 to 4 weeks later and read it. You'll be amazed what you pick up. The other thing is, and almost every writer I know who's professional does that, talk your book out loud. Don't read it to somebody. You know, read it to the rug, read it to your dog, read it to the television. It doesn't matter what you read it to. Don't read it to another human being who's you will be amazed what you pick up with your ear. When you say the words, we're so closely connected. Our eyes and our ears and our mouths, we feel that kind of stuff. I pick up all the extraneous words and the bumpy sentences because I talk them out loud. When I used to work at the Valley News, when everybody was on deadline, this is what you would hear throughout the entire news, because we were all reading our stuff out loud. It's amazing how that works. Oh, another hint, writer's hint. This is from the author Ernie Hebert, who was head of the creative writer programming in Dartmouth for a long time. We all learn from other writers. If there's something that you want to learn how to write, for example, if you want to learn how to write a chase scene, find a book with a really good chase scene, sit down with a pad of paper and a pen and write it out. You will be amazed at what you can feel in the rhythm. It's a great way to learn how to do different kinds of writing. So, copy editing. Just a note to all of you, if you go through the traditional publishing process, a lot of agents are now requiring authors to pay for having their books edited before they're submitted to the publisher. This is not uncommon anymore. Proofreading.
Question back there.
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
You don't want a question right now, you need to go through this, but I have a question I want to ask.
Okay, all right.
Or a comment.
Okay, so copy editing happens before you hand it to a text designer. Try to make sure as much as possible that it is as correct as you can possibly make it, because it will save you money in the long term. Proofreading is, so you have this raw text and you have this text design. Text design is sort of like a Jell-O mold, and your manuscript is like Jell-O in the liquid state. So you take your liquid and you pour it into the Jell-O mold, and then it forms as it gels. This is not, after you've done that, that's not the place to do copy editing, believe me. It will drive everybody crazy. But that's where you do proofreading. A proofreader's job is to check what the text designer has done. No widows, no orphans, that kind of thing. It is also to pick up those last typos, spacing problems, inconsistencies. A good proofreader will actually improve your work quite a bit. So, finding a really good editor, again, it's a touchy-feely process. We have several local publishers in the Upper Valley, Chelsea Green over in White River Junction, University Press of New England. If you go into Writer's Digest, and I know they usually keep a copy of this on the shelf in the hall, they have a whole list of publishers. Give them a call. Say, I'm looking for an editor and I've got this kind of a book. Can you give me a recommendation? Oftentimes they will, because they'll know the editors in the area, oftentimes they'll be able to point you towards somebody. There are 2 writers groups in the bi-state area, and I recommend both of them. I've been members of both and spoken at both. In New Hampshire, it's the New Hampshire Writers Project, and in Vermont, it's the League of Vermont Writers. They have editors who are members of both of those groups. Amazon's Create Space and Ingram Spark both offer production services. Production services are defined as editing, text design, cover design. A good place to actually go to figure out how much something is going to cost is Amazon's Create Space, because they will tell you per word, or per page, depending, how much this stuff is going to cost. So you can actually sit there and calculate this out. When you talk about editing, they'll talk about how deep, and that's pretty much what editing is. How deep do you want somebody to go? The more you want that, the more expensive it is. Quick proofreading will fix all the typos, but it won't necessarily make a book better. Ingram Spark uses outside companies. It has partnerships with them, and they have those companies on their website so that you can go there and check out what they do. Always, 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 always ask for samples of the work of anybody that you are thinking about hiring. In the editorial process, there is a thing called a test edit. And a test edit consists of sending, when I was doing this kind of work, I always asked authors to send me about 2,500 words from the middle of their book. Not the beginning, not the end, because I know that writers always spend a lot of time at the beginning, at the end. I want to see what the crud is in the middle. So I would ask them to send me 2,500 words, and I would go through and I would edit it, usually in 2 different ways. I would do a really hard copy edit, and then I would do a proofreading on the same text, starting in the same place, so that they could actually see what the difference was. And I would say, based on the number of words and how long this took me, it would cost you X to have me copy edit it, it would cost you Y to have me proofread it. And understand that an estimate is an estimate, is an estimate, is an estimate.
Can I ask my question now?
Yeah.
I guess this is, I still think that if you have a book you really like, and you think it's saleable, you try a traditional publisher. The only time that I've published a lot of books, that I went to FSG, Farrar, Straus and Gifford, and I had a book. I happened to have the most marvelous, marvelous editor. He was kind. He made suggestions about, first what he said, it needs a narrator. This is about the Lewis and Clark expedition. Needs the narrator. I found the narrator, which was perfect for me, because I much prefer to write fiction. And this isn't fiction, but it's real. He took me through the whole process. It was still in the galley stage at that point, when you've got galleys. But he was just so kind. I've been to smaller publishers that are published it. The copy editors aren't kind, and it's very hard to work with them.
Yep.
So being a good copy editor is absolutely important. The only time I've done a self-published book, because I determined it was going to be my way or the highway. And of course, I had connections with the publishing world. Well, it was too full of philosophical, or it was too psychological. It's got to be one or the other. I said, no, I do this. So I went to Create Space, but very early. So a couple of days ago, I discovered that I only had 2 copies of this left. I had sold a lot of the others, given away a couple, because it has some therapy things with it. And Create Space still is Create Space outside of Amazon. And I didn't realize that of course I should realize it's on Amazon. I've sold books from Amazon.
Create Space was bought. They were a
But-
separate company, they were bought by Amazon.
Well, Create Space, suddenly they're gonna give me my 10 books that I want, very reasonably. But it's gonna take 10 days or a long time. If I'd gone to Amazon Prime and tried to get my books from them, it might have cost a little more, but it's a whole different, are Create Space and Amazon the same, is my question.
Amazon, Create Space was its own company. Amazon
Yes, I
doesn't
know.
usually invent anything.
Well, Amazon didn't have it when
Yeah.
this book was 2004.
Yeah. My figuring is that, because I've never used Create Space, I've always used Ingram Spark or Ingram Lightning Source, that they're not set up within the Create Space environment to be able to fulfill orders quite as easily. So that's why it would probably be a better way to go through Prime.
To go through Prime.
Yeah, to go through Prime.
Well, I think so, I think I
Yeah.
made a mistake, but now it's in, so I'm
Yeah.
just doing it.
Yep. Let me see, I can't personally vouch for the services on either one of those because I've never used them because I do my own stuff or I hire my own folks. So, buyer beware. So, I want to spend just a few minutes, because Pat's going to call time on me in about 7 minutes, talking about what is next, or what next steps you could possibly take. These are 4 books that I highly recommend. This is the single best book on the process of writing ever written, in my opinion, and I've read a ton of these things. She's practical, she's straightforward. As far as I'm concerned, she really gets it right. Annie Lamott, Bird by Bird. There's a second one that is almost as good, but I still think she beats it. It is by Stephen King, who writes books that I would never read because I don't get into horror. But he wrote it's partly a memoir and it's partly about the writing process called On Writing. It is really well done. He's a very practical, these are the kinds of authors that I really gravitate towards. They're the ones who understand that this is a business. It doesn't mean you don't love the art, the creativity, and all that kind of stuff, but it's a business, so they're very practical about it. So if you only can buy or want to read one book on writing, that is the one I would definitely recommend. This one here is all about the stuff we've been talking about, of what happens inside of a book. This has such a tiny spine, I think it only probably measures about like this, maybe 3/8 of an inch. It is packed with great information that is presented in a way that is eminently understandable. She not only explains how you do these things and why you should do them, but what it does to your book. She's a wonderful designer. She's got 2 or 3 other books, but this is the one I recommend because it's just so easy. It's called The Mac is Not a Typewriter, and the author's name is Robin Williams. If you want to be a professional writer, I can't recommend enough having a copy of this on your desk. The Chicago Manual of Style. This is the Bible for the entire traditional publishing industry. If you want to know how to use a comma, it will explain to you how to use a comma. If you want to know how to put AD or BC or BCE properly in type with the right punctuation, they will tell you how to do it. You would be surprised how easy this is to read. The indexing in this thing, I just can't imagine how the index this thing, is fascinating. You can look up anything in the index, it will bring you right to the right place in the book. It's thick, it's like this. It doesn't go out of style that often. I don't even know, this is the 15th, I don't even know what edition they're in now. There may not even be another one since this one. I highly recommend having this, especially if you're going to hire an editor, because, or if you're going to do some more self-editing, this is a really good place to go. And this is all about what contracts are like in publishing. This is called The Fine Print of Self-Publishing by Mark Levine. Mark is an attorney, and I think he got started doing this because he knew one too many writers who had gone through self-publishing companies and they got abused, and he got tired of seeing people abused. He is up to, this is the 3rd edition, I think he's up to the 5th or 6th edition now. But even if you find a used one that's older, the basic advice he has in there, I think is still quite valid.
Sonia, does he mean independent publishing, or is he really talking about self-publishing companies?
He's talking about self-publishing companies. He's also talking about like Amazon. He just basically gives you the lay of the legal land. These are the things that you need to think about. These are the things that when a contract says this, this is what it means. This is how to keep out of trouble. This is to make sure that nobody steals your copyright. You know, he's really, really quite thorough and very readable. I mean, this sounds like pretty dull stuff.
You made the distinction last week between self-publishing
He does
companies
both.
and independent
He
publishing.
does both.
Both, okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
he does both. He really gets into the self-publishing companies. He hates Author House, which makes him my man. Okay, so here are some suggestions of what you could do with your books. We were talking about word processing programs. Spend some time figuring out how those things work. Try your hand at some preliminary typesetting on your own. Figure out if you have images that you're going to put in your book. Figure out how to put the images properly inside your book. One of the things that you need to understand about images is that type will run right over an image unless you make that image something that becomes almost like an obstacle or a dam in the river where the type goes around it. That is called a text wrap in most programs. You want to figure out how to use that. Experiment with this. And then when you get it to a point where you think, okay, I really want to look at this thing in a different format, toddle on over to Staples or Noman here in the local area. Ask them to print you a single copy and bind it as a book. You'll be amazed what you'll learn. You'll be amazed what you see when you open it up, because you looked for all those typos. There'll be one right in the middle of page 69 that is this big and you never saw it. Learn to forgive yourself for those, as long as you don't have too many. Set yourself up with a rudimentary website. I actually started doing my own website this way. Is I went to WordPress.com. You can get freebie websites through them. They won't necessarily be the right URL. If I had my website under this system, it would be soniahakala.wordpress.com. But you can get this for free for a certain amount of time. and practice publishing on it. Put up a piece that you've written, put up an article that you've written, put up a short story that you've written, a recipe that you have. Whatever it is that you're working on, don't put any pressure on yourself. Don't tell anybody it's there. Chances are, nobody will find it. It's yours. But you will see your work out there in public. Again, it's one of those perception things. It's amazing what you will learn.
If you do that, is it findable? Like, can somebody just sort of happen upon it?
They could happen upon it.
Uh-huh.
You know, you can keep, there are ways to keep them hidden. I don't know that, but
Okay.
I think there are. And then Susan brought in a photo book. This is one that she did through iPhoto on Apple, right?
Through Apple, right?
Yeah. This is also a wonderful way to learn some of the minutia of publishing. There are 3, because you said that Apple no longer does
They
this.
no
right?
longer do it.
Okay. These are 3 that I have used, Shutterfly, Snapfish, and Blurb. They're all comparable in price, they're all comparable in quality, but do shop around. There are a number of companies that do this.
One that was recommended to me recently was Mixbook.
Mixbook, yes, that was another
That
one.
was
I
supposed
saw.
to be
Yeah.
very good, that has gotten good reviews and better than some of the others, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do shop around, do shop for reviews, take a look. I wouldn't recommend doing a large book on this because they are
It
expensive.
runs into a lot of money, yeah.
Yep. But printing quality is always nice. They do them on clay-coated paper,
Yeah.
which means that the ink stays more on the surface and it makes the color pop. I'm gonna just pass this one around so everybody can see that. And Pat, I finished on time.
You did. And anybody have a evaluation they wanna hand me, please, put in?
Anybody belong to the authors guild?
You handed it back. Okay.
Okay, now, questions?
Great.
Must have something.
Will you post this also?
I'm sorry?
Will you post this also?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that helpful? I made it into a PDF.
Yeah.
Yes, Alan?
A question, for the cost of the book, if one looks at Ingram Spark, it will tell you how much the book will cost. What's the, how does that work? Is that the amount that the publisher will ask for? What about the mock-up that then becomes a profit for the author?
All of the production
Can you
costs
change
are
that?
extra. If you go on to CreateSpace or you go on to, I would recommend Ingram Spark because their tools are actually easier to use. All they're calculating is how much the book costs to print and how much, first of all, they'll calculate, depending on what you tell it as far as the size of the book is concerned, it will calculate how much it will cost to print a single copy and how much it will cost to ship that single copy. You could do it for 100 copies, 200 copies, whatever. The higher up you go, the more books you buy, of course, the greater the discount. Then it will do what is it called? Publisher's compensation. And what it will do is it will figure out based on the statistics of the book. And the statistics are this: how big is it? 6 by 9. How many pages are in here? I don't remember. This is about 200 and probably 260, including the blank pages in the back. It is black and white. It is black print on, I chose cream colored paper. It is perfect bound. That is what this binding is called. The cover is in color, and the cover also is glossy. It's going to ask you all of those questions, and then it's going to ask you, what is the retail price? What price are you putting on? This is how you find out how to price a book. And you can, I tried, for example, this one is $16.95. I used to do $14.95 on all my novels, but the price of printing, the cost of printing has gone up. So this one is $16.95. So I put in $16.95, I click the button, and what it does is it will calculate what the publisher's compensation is per book. That's how much comes to me. These are paid. Publisher's compensation is paid by these companies every month, but it is always 3 months behind. So if I sell a book on January 1st, I will not get that money until April 1st, 3 full months. And the reason is this. Bookstores have, and this includes online booksellers, they have 90 days to return books. So instead of paying you for your book and then asking you to pay them back because a book got returned, they just wait that 90 days. That's why everything is 90 days behind. Traditional publishers usually only pay but their authors royalties every quarter. It's usually only 4 times a year.
But the question that when one goes into Ingram Spark and enters all that information, it will give you a price for the book. How does one decide on the publisher's compensation and the author's compensation? Is the author responsible for that, or will the publisher have some?
Are you talking about in traditional publishing?
No, for independent publishing.
Okay, independent publisher's compensation is a single number. It's it's what's coming back to you. If you were the author and the publisher, that's your money. If you're publishing a book for somebody else, then you need to figure out what that is.
Right, but how does one arrive at that number? Is it totally up to the author and publisher? If I'm publishing through an independent author, can I decide what price I want to charge?
Yep.
And then the printer will take what they want to cover their costs, and
They-
the rest
yep.
goes to me. So there's flexibility on the publisher's compensation.
Yep. I mean, if I wanted to, I could charge $19.95 for
What is
these
the
books.
name of that? I can't see it from here.
I'm sorry?
What is the name? I can't see it.
Oh, the name of this?
Yes,
Lights and Water Dancing.
thank you. Is that the book that tells us what to do with the,
No, this is this is my 4th novel.
oh, what's the name of the book that just tells us all about how to deal with this? Didn't you mention it?
The fine print of publishing?
Is that the one that does that? And so we have already fine print of publishing, is that the one?
Yeah.
So it's up to the author to decide, well, I want
Yes.
to have increase my compensation for the book, but not to make it too expensive that,
Exactly.
that no one buys it.
And one of the
So-
places that you want to, I'll tell you, Amazon's a great place for research. So you have a book that's about living overseas, am I right? Peace Corps, that kind of thing? So figure out what sort of subject category someone would search for a book like yours. And go on to Amazon, go into their book section and plug in those words. See what pops up. And what you're doing is called comparative title analysis. You're gonna take a look at, because the blurb about the book will have all this information. It will tell you how big the book is, it will tell you what the price is, it will tell you the number of pages. Your book should be in that range. Okay, if your book has color photographs in it and the other one doesn't, your book is automatically gonna be more expensive.
It sounds like then the independent publisher, you can set whatever price you want, they're not gonna sit there.
Yeah,
and check
but it
you
is
how much
always
comes.
what the market will bear.
Right,
You
right.
can charge whatever you want, will somebody else pay for it? That's always the key. That's why looking at what other people charge for the same kind of book is always a really good idea. But I recommend going on Spark and playing with those tools. You know, plug in all different kinds of things. You know, if you're doing a recipe book and it's gonna be 8.5 by 11 and it's 42 pages long, how much is that gonna cost you to print? How much will you get back if you sell it for X? I mean, I spend forever on this thing when I'm trying to do pricing just right. I plug in different numbers, different sizes, and just figure out what's going on. It's a wonderful place to go and play. And the nice thing about Spark or Ingram is they won't ask you for any contact information. You can sit there and play all day long. Anybody else? Go ahead, Alan. You
Another
got 5
question.
minutes.
For the copyright, I had seen somewhere that say for example, one writes a chapter in a book, so that each of the authors has written a chapter, that the author maintains the copyright for that text, but the publisher of the book has the formatting of it, so that one wouldn't have to go back to the publisher to use your own text if you wanted to use it or elsewhere. How does that work?
See this one right here?
It depends on the contract you have with the publisher
Yes.
and what rights you retain. in generally, absent anything else, the author of a work owns the copyright. You can give your copyright away by contract unless somebody else takes it. I worked for a company where a lot of the scientists would have works published in journals. The journal took the copyright. I mean, this was the way it was done, there was no option, the journal took the copyright, owned the copyright. We retained some rights to make use of it, but that was it. So it really depends on the contract. If it's, some things are a work made for hire, has its own special rules and magic words.
Those are magic words to stay away from, actually.
Yes.
Work for hire.
Yeah, yeah. So it really depends on but there can be times when the publisher would own like the format, the entire thing, but you could and if there were different authors, that authors would retain a copyright on their works, and it can be specified what use you can make or can't use.
Yeah. For example, I edited a book of short stories true stories that were written by quilters around the world, actually, and I did it for St. Martin's Press. The way that contract was set up is that St. Martin's Press owned the rights to the book, the whole collection. But those individual authors had the right to reuse that work once the book was published.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, one of the contributing authors for American Patchwork was Earlene Fowler, who is she's a mystery author. And all of her mystery novels have quilting themes in them. And she wanted to make sure that she could use that story again and again and again. So when we negotiated the contract with St. Martin's Press, we did that specifically with her in mind. I mean, it applied to everybody in the book, but we did that with her in mind. So agents will tell you, publishers would tell you, everything is negotiable.
Yep. And Joya asked about the possible copyright on like the fabric.
Yes.
And using something like that.
Photo, right?
Yeah, photo. With fabric, if what you used was a little piece of it,
Yeah.
and then there's another whole thing in copyright called fair use, and there are
Which has to do with reviews.
4 factors on fair use: educational use, use and reviews. Are you competing with the owner of the copyright? If you're using, if they have fabric and you're using a little piece of fabric as an illustration on a cover, so there's a whole, again, there is no black and white in copyright, or very little. It's big
One
gray.
thing to bear in mind, just because it's on the web does not mean it is free for you
No.
to use.
The web does not equal public domain.
That's right. Most of the stuff that you
It's copyrighted.
would pick up from the website, it's quite possible somebody owns the copyright out there. Particularly if it's a painting, a
Right.
work
Oh,
of
yeah.
art, oh my gosh.
And
Museums zealously guard that
It's
stuff.
not necessary to have a copyright notice to own the copyright. If there's no copyright notice, doesn't mean that there's not an owner of a copyright on it. And so putting a copyright notice on anything gives you extra protection. Somebody can't say, oh gee, I didn't know. There's no innocent infringement if there's a copyright notice, but just because there's no notice doesn't mean it's not copyrighted.
That's the reason why if you go on to my website, I post something 5 days a week. And I always use a photograph that I have taken, so there's no question it's mine, on there. If you ever look really closely, it will say photograph, copyright 2018 by Sonia Hackler. If it was taken by my husband and my husband's there, but it's right on the photograph.
Yeah.
So,
it's good to put a notice on anything.
yeah. And also, making sure that you copyright your own material.
Right.
The basic law, and correct me if I'm wrong, the basic law is as soon as it is created in a physical form,
Yep.
you own the copyright. So if you're doing something by longhand, I mean, I write all my first drafts by longhand, I own that. As soon as it comes out at the end of my pen, I own that.
If it's in a permanent form of expression.
Yep.
Your ideas are not.
Yeah. And also, the only place to register your copyright is copyright.gov.
Yep.
That's the only place to register in the
Yeah.
United States. And that's in that paperwork that I sent around
Yeah.
at the very beginning. So, we're done, folks. I hope
Okay.
you're thoroughly enthused.